My name is Tasha Foot. I'm a freelance agri-food journalist based here in Brussels. I have the pleasure of guiding the discussion over the first half of this event. So it's great to be here and in this room. Very interesting to hear the history. I'm not here to give ideas, but I thought it was interesting that there was a cow in the original negotiations. So that was an interesting observation, maybe food for thought. So the first part of this morning session is all about policy perspectives with a look back on the work that was done or not done over the past few years, and a look ahead on the future path towards sustainability. Of course, the conversation falls at a very key moment, not only because the EU elections are just around the corner, but also because of this continuing unrest we see in the farming community. So we will be talking about the policy response and digging into that a little bit more. And to help us do so, we have with us today Liberal MEP Pascal Canfin, who is also chair of the European Parliament's Envy Committee. You can see Pascal there on the screen. We also have with us today Grzegorz Brodziak, who is Vice President of the Polish Agricultural Federation and Chairman of the Board of Goodvalley Agro. We have Pierre-Marie Aubert, who is a Director of Agri-Food Policies at IDDRI, that's the Sustainable Development Think Tank, and Brigitte Misonne, the Head of Unit for Animal Products at the European Commission's DG Agri. So welcome to all of our panellists. I'd like to welcome you now to the stage. I'm not sure where you all are, dotted around. We can bring you up to the front here. Excellent. And so we're going to kick off with a round of opening remarks from our panellists. And I'd like to start with Pascal, who is joining us online. And I know is on a slightly tight agenda. He has to leave quite soon. So Pascal, let me open with you. And I'd like to hear your reflections. Maybe I can frame your opening remarks about the legacy of the farm to fork. As the mandate comes to the close, what in your view is the legacy of the Green Deal, this policy, and what would you say are the key lessons to take away from this? Pascal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. So I would say that if there is one legacy at that stage, is that there is little legacy. Okay, why? First, because a lot of the rules within the scope of farm to fork are not in place, and either are adopted but not in place, or are not adopted and very likely will not be adopted, at least short term. I take one example, the pesticide regulation that was, let's say, killed in the parliament, and on the opposite, the new genomic techniques that is being killed in the council. So, short term, there is little prospect that things move. Of course, medium term, that could be different, but short term, it's almost a done deal. Then, when it comes to nature restoration law, it is adopted, narrowly, but adopted. So now it's going to start into the implementation phase, but nothing is in place. Then regarding the greening of the CAP, because of course you cannot disconnect the farm to fork strategy and the CAP. The greening of the CAP has just started. The greening measures of the CAP have just started to be implemented. But as you know, regarding the GAEC, one of the conditionality, it's being derogated for second time now, and for the rest, it might be jeopardized if I follow the first recommendations coming from the communication in the maybe very short-term reform of the CAP. So if you put all things together, very little, to be honest, very little has been agreed and almost nothing has been implemented. It's the sad reality. And why? Mainly because there was no real theory of change. And I said that, as you know, I'm a big supporter of the Green Deal, so I'm saying this very constructively. But there was a very clear lack of theory of change. And when we have the theory of change in other sectors of the Green Deal, it's of course not an easy game. I mean, who can think that it will be an easy game to get to climate neutrality? Obviously nobody, but it keeps on moving. Mobility, energy, industry, and so on, where we are facing new challenges because we are moving ahead, and we are moving ahead because we have a theory of change shared with economic players. At least a majority of them, not all of them, we will never get unanimity behind, but at least a majority of them. And still, we have a political majority to keep on moving the ball. That's why we need to try to depolarize the Green Deal, the agri part of the Green Deal, or the agri-food part of the Green Deal. And that's the key word for me. As soon as you polarized the green transition, then it's the recipe for failure. In the agri part, it has been highly polarized for let's say, for the last 12 months. And it means that we cannot operate anymore. Because either everything falls, or if it passes, it is challenged 2 years later, or if it passes with a very narrow margin, there is a high potential of, let's say, poor implementation or lack of implementation. So the core element is the theory of change. And then I have some concrete proposals to make, but maybe you have questions to raise up.
I do, and we can definitely dig into those concrete proposals, but thank you very much for setting the scene there. I heard some laughter from our panellists when you said about the lack of the legacy of the farm to fork, so I think you've maybe got some agreement here on the panel. So thank you for that. So before we get in and dig into this panel discussion, I know that each of our panellists sitting here have prepared some short presentations for us. So I will start with Grzegorz. I believe yours are the first. So I will give you the floor, and hopefully we can get your presentations up.
From here or from there?
As you maybe from here is easier, yeah. Just for time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the invitation and having a chance to participate in this project. Let me start with explaining who I am and who Goodvalley is, and how we can maybe contribute to the discussion and debate about the sustainable model in agriculture, even talking about large-scale agriculture. So basically we are based in Poland, western part of Poland, where we used to have large state-run farms in the past. And the idea of rebuilding this operation after the collapse of the state farms came from Denmark. Our Danish investors, a group of farmers, decided to go into this project and started to build it up in a new way, adopting from the very early beginning new solutions coming from their experience in Denmark. At that time, we didn't we didn't use the word sustainability, we rather used the word logic and rationale. Building the whole value chain, starting with crop production, own crop production on 13,000 hectares of land today, own feed production, own pig production, then with slaughtering, processing, and production of renewable energy in the end, based off slurry and biomass. So very much a model of a circular bioeconomy build up during 30 years. Nothing happens from year to year. It takes time and also money. If we take the next slide, you see all the parts of this value chain, and what is crucial to us that we can present this to our consumers and try to build up even bigger trust in the end in how things are produced from the very beginning, and that they come from a circular and quite a closed model, located also close to one another when in terms of sites, production sites, farms, and facilities. Let's take the next slide. This would be a typical picture of a farm which we run, surrounded with some hectares of land. In this case, we have a farm for 9,000 finishers and about 700 hectares of land, and also a biogas plant. In fact, the first one in Poland, which we built back in 2005, paving the way to the development of biogas industry in somehow. So this together creates a circular model where we take even whole Goodvalley company with all the operations. And now with 8 biogas plants, we can say we are self-sufficient in electricity. And we even have a surplus which is sold to the grid, and we have a coverage of 70% talking about our heat consumption. So very much in the direction of the circular model. If we take the next one, the final part of the business is of course slaughtering, processing, and sales to mainly big market chains. We slaughter around 12,000 pigs per week, and they come from 25 farms which are spread around in the Pomerania. So each of them had this circular context of land and biogas. And in the end, we have been trying to communicate these things to the consumers, and that is a longer story which maybe will touch in our debate. It's a difficult task. It is especially difficult to put an extra margin on the product just because you have this added value and you communicate it. In our case, we put this QR code on our packages back in 2022, I believe, and that enabled the consumers to get into a website and check the whole chain and the way how products are created. So basically, when the last slide, which I like very much, which kind of was a conclusion of a meeting in Lyon last year, when we discussed the European Green Deal. It really takes and requires a big effort in 3 areas at the same time if we want to achieve these goals. I agree fully with this. So it's not only about agroecology, but also at the same time change of paradigms in our consumption. When we talk about the wrong distribution, also about our food, access to food across the world, but also reduction of food waste, which also now is huge. So with all these 3, maybe we have a chance to achieve the goals. Let me just finish with this one. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Grzegorz. Let me pass the floor now to you, Brigitte. You've also prepared some slides, as I understand it, and I will pass you the floor for your opening remarks. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you. So I understand that we are more in the research world today, but we are talking about policy. So maybe the first question is there a place here for policy? Do we need a policy? What policy are we talking about? So today we talk about livestock, in particular, pathways to make them or make the sector sustainable. So maybe it's important first to look at the sector. So what are we talking about? In Europe, we are talking about 134 million pigs. We are talking about 75 million cows, 70 million sheep and goats, 1.6 billion poultry birds. So that's a bit the framework in which we are working for the moment. What is also very clear when you look at the latest years or even the latest decades is that we have overall everywhere in all sectors a decrease in animal population, in farmed animal population. You have also a very diverse landscape when you look at the 27 member states of the Union. 54% of all livestock population is located in only 4 member states. So you have them in Spain, France, Germany, and Italy. So with those 4 member states, you have more than half of livestock population. In Spain, you have 1/4 of all pigs in Spain. And you have also 1/4 of all sheep in Spain. In Greece, that I've not yet mentioned, you have 1/4 of all goats. And then in France, you have nearly 1/4 of all bovines, 23% when we look at 2022 figures. When you have a look at farms, we saw the picture of tractors in Brussels. So when we look at farmers, at those who are in the field or at those who are taking care of those farmed animals, we have in Europe some 4 million farms with livestock. And this is a bit less than half of all farms in Europe. So it's 45% of all farms in Europe. And most of them are small farms. 41% of them have less than 2 hectares, so really small farms. 50% of them have less than 5 livestock units. So just to put the picture, we've just heard a very good example from Goodvalley with very big farms. So we have to be conscious of the variety of the landscape. It means that when we look at that, we should never believe that there is a one-size-fits-all solution. And that means also there is no one-size-fits-all policy, maybe. Then, what are the prospects from an economic point of view? Are we looking at a sector that is that has positive prospects, or are we looking at a sector that is restructuring, adapting, that is maybe suffering from some bashing here and there, being reluctant to invest because of maybe fears about policies? Basically, you have production for all of them declining or projected to decline in the coming decade, except for poultry. For some of them, it's a trend that has started already some time ago. But for milk, for instance, it's the first time in the milk history of the Union that we have prospects for downward production. So, coming back to our question, do we need to bother about policy for sustainable livestock? MEP Canfin talked about the Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy. Why do we have a Green Deal? So we have to put ourselves back 5 years ago when Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was a candidate to become the president, and when she hinted at this Green Deal in her political priorities. What was the aim? The aim was not to reduce anything. The aim was to give a green growth strategy ahead of Europe. And why does it matter for livestock? Because indeed, there is an impact, a footprint of livestock on a number of elements in our planet. And it's important that everybody, not just the livestock sector, not just farmers, everybody is aware that efforts have to be done if we want all humankind to continue living on this planet. So what's the share to be done by livestock? In order to be able to answer that question, we have to look at facts. So where is the impact? It's in greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll come back to that in a minute. It's also in pollution, in particular in areas with high livestock density. You have pollution on water via nitrate leakage, but also ammonia and nitrogen emissions. You have soil acidification coming from livestock, air and water pollution beyond the ones just mentioned. With regard to greenhouse gas emissions, you know that we have been on a downward trend for a number of years already. And thanks to the so-called CAP strategic plans that you have no doubt heard about and that each member state has to adopt and make green-lighted by the Commission. We expect to have a further reduction in the years to come by 8% with regard to greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and livestock in particular. As you know, livestock is making up 65% of direct greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in the EU. Are we good pupils or bad pupils? When we have a look at the rest of the world, in fact, we realize that for most of the emissions, we are basically the only ones having made efforts so far and having reduced our emissions. You have the first graph with total greenhouse gas emissions, the second one with methane, third one on nitrous oxides, and the last one also on nitrous oxides, but from synthetic fertilizers. So that allows us to position the EU vis-à-vis the rest of the world. And maybe another figure to keep in mind, when you look at EU livestock greenhouse gas emissions, you are in fact looking at 1% of total world emissions, 1%. And again, the question, do we need policy or not? In fact, we need policy because it's not enough to identify what's wrong with livestock, so where there is a footprint that we want to reduce in livestock, we have also to take account of the positive externalities of livestock and of everything that we are in danger of losing if we have an approach that is drastic on livestock. Animals convert what humans cannot eat into something that becomes nutritious for humans. Livestock farming uses land that cannot be used for crops, what we call marginal land. Livestock, and it was also recalled by Grzegorz from Goodvalley, is a potential source of renewable energy and organic fertilization. When you have extensive pasture, this is not the case for all livestock farming models, but when you have them, they have a proven potential in terms of carbon sequestration. So it's part of the solution, not just part of the problem. And livestock, especially grazing ruminants, can also have a positive impact on biodiversity, providing wildlife habitats for flora and fauna that are specific to those grassland ecosystems. Finally, we started with it, we end with it. Let's not forget that livestock is, in some areas of Europe, the only possible economic activity, the only activity that makes rural areas a place for humans to live in. So, the answer to the question, yes, we need policy if we conceive policy as a way to give a direction. That's probably what we have with policies outside the Common Agricultural Policy. Yes, we need policy if it is an accompanying policy. And that's what we have with the Common Agricultural Policy, that is trying to reward those who make steps towards a sustainable future. Because in the future, we will continue to rely on livestock for providing nutritious proteins to humans. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Brigitte. And now, last but certainly not least, let me pass the floor over to you, Pierre-Marie. I understand you're just going to ad-lib. You're not using presentation.
Yeah, I have some slides, but
okay,
I prefer to go like this.
Okay.
Thanks, Brigitte, Grzegorz, and Pascal, and of course Natasha for those preliminary thoughts. Yeah, coming back to the end of Brigitte's presentation and what Pascal said as well, we need policies, and policies are the instrument through which we can kind of implement a vision or gear towards a vision. And I think it's all about the theory of change that Pascal mentioned earlier. What is the theory of change? It's basically about having a vision, what we want for the ag and food sector, and in our case for the livestock sector. What's the social and political compromise which is behind? I mean, do we have a kind of compromise at the level of society between different political forces that kind of back this vision? And then once we have that, let's think about the right instruments, the right policies to do that. And of course, it's not, you know, one debate you have and then you close once for all. It's an iterative process between, okay, the vision, how far is the vision backed by science? What do science tell us about, you know, the quality of the environment we're going to have with that, the socioeconomic impacts of that vision, etc. Okay, based on that, to what extent do we get that compromise politically, socially about that vision? And then, okay, are the instruments we have designed the right ones to really move forward the kind of vision we have discussed? So it's all about those three building blocks and going around them and using science to feed that conversation as much as possible. So I think it's all about that. And as Pascal said, maybe at some point in the farm-to-fork negotiation, we kind of forgot about the need to build compromises, about the need to really discuss and find ways in which we could all move in the right direction. And then, no surprise that the instruments that we designed were kind of, you know, left aside. So, coming back to the question of livestock and what kind of vision or what kind of policies then we could have, I think the question is about what is the vision again, and to design that vision, it's about what is important. And it's a question of, it's a political question, it's a social question. What do we want for our sector, for our livestock sector, for agriculture? And here I think we don't have the choice. We need to take into consideration with the same level of ambition biophysical question and social and economical question. There's no way in which we can do otherwise, because basically if we don't adapt our sector, there is no future for our sector given the level of shocks we are going to kind of to deal with in the future. So if we take this into account, and I'll stop here, what do we know from science? We've been exploring in Pathways and elsewhere what scenarios, biophysical scenarios, tell us about the livestock sector and the agri-food systems in a number of places in Europe. And the answer is clear. We need kind of, physically speaking at least, we need kind of important changes in dietary practices towards slightly less animal source food in diets, and at the same time a change towards animal or livestock systems that rely less on feed that is in competition with food and that are more adapted to an evolving environment. That is pretty clear. Then how to convert this into something that is appealing for stakeholders, where there is something in it for them, that is where we don't have so much evidence, because we haven't been working so much on, okay, how do we convert a biophysical vision, which is really nice, but what about farmers there? What about value chain workers there? What about consumers? How much they will have to pay and how much they will be rewarded for the work they do? This is where a project like Pathways come in to try to bring in together economic analysis, biophysical analysis, social analysis to feed in the political debate. So I'll end up saying that we've done preliminary analysis in the dairy sector in France, for example, and we see that the option space is much wider than we usually think in terms of combining biophysical objectives, socioeconomic objectives, including the price of food for consumers and the number of jobs that the food system has to offer to society. So not to say the dairy sector applies to all of the sectors and that there are no trade-offs. There are trade-offs. But I think we need to continue that journey towards identifying, okay, where are the trade-offs and how can we build synergies to ultimately get to the kind of social and political compromise behind a vision that will help us to design the right instruments and then to implement them.
Thank you very much, and that loops us very nicely back to Pascal's comments right at the beginning. So I will turn to Pascal now, who we're going to hopefully get up onto the screen in just a second. I know he has to leave at past, so I'm going to focus my questions there, but I promise I will come back to you guys afterwards. So Pascal, you spoke about, you had some concrete proposals. We just heard from Pierre-Marie about this lack of vision, a lack of vision going in, a lack of coherent vision perhaps, that was a problem. Didn't set the foundation for the Green Deal adequately. Can you speak a little bit more, dig into these concrete ideas that you have moving forward, how to create that vision, and also you spoke about the need to depolarize this debate, and of course this is coming on the back of Ursula von der Leyen's strategic dialogue. Do you see anything there in the space to maybe depolarize the debate? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I would focus my intervention in the remaining minutes I have on three elements, three proposals that I've been pushing, we will push for next term, precisely to help depolarizing and implementing the transition based on the objectives we agreed on before. The first one is an equivalent of ETS for the food sector. So I insist that it is not an ETS on farmers. It's the opposite, okay? So far, the vast majority of the regulation, on the green regulations regarding agriculture, whether we talk about pesticides, animal welfare, and so on, are always targeting farmers themselves and not the value chain, which I think is the core of the mistake. Because the farmers are, on average, of course, it's a very diverse world, but on average, the weakest link of the value chain. And if you, in the theory of change, if you target the weakest link, you do not change, you just fail. So we need to think who are the best placed players to drive and to implement the change. And obviously, my response to that is that it's better to target the companies that are transforming, processing, and then selling the goods, the food, and not only the ones producing the food. Because then, per nature, you have level playing field, per nature, you have capacity to invest medium term, you have a capacity to have, of course, in many cases, a larger balance sheet to support the medium term investments, and so on and so on. So that's why my proposal is an ETS for the food sector from the big cooperatives to the retailers when the retailers sell their own brand, under their own brand, not, of course, duplicating the ETS for processors, but when retailers sell under their own brand, they have to be covered. You discuss the threshold, then you discuss the target, and that's exactly the work which is now being done by the Commission, because Ursula von der Leyen is very much supportive of this new approach. And I guess that if political conditions are met, obviously, that could be a very big priority for next term on the agri part, which is, again, I insist on this, the opposite of a carbon prices of farmers. Because once you have this, an ETS for the food sector, then you create a value. And then, of course, these companies, if they want to change, if they want to reduce their CO2 footprint and biodiversity to be put in place, to be taken into account as well, they will have to transfer value to the farms. Because if I take, I don't know, Danone or Unilever, 80% of their carbon footprint is the agri-sourcing. So if you put them under a reduction target, then of course they will finance the CO2 reduction in the farms. And then you solve a big part of the equation where farmers say, you put new rules, but you don't give me the same, the financial tools first, And when I sell my production, when I am in a business relation, these requirements on animal welfare, on pesticides, and so on are not reflected by the companies I sell to. So that's the core of the problem. We need to align the business rules and the NV commitment. Second, to go very fast, level playing field. The mirror clauses is key. I know it's a big debate. I know it's more complicated than it could appear, and I'm aware of the complexity of that. But if we keep on having a commission that is reluctant, opposing, dragging its feet to the mirror clauses, we will fail again. So we managed to start having something. We have this on antibiotics, we have this on nicotinoids, we have this on deforestation, which is very good because it was just non-existent a few years before. But then we need to reassure that there will be relevant, appropriate mirror clauses when it makes sense, and it makes sense in a lot of cases. If we do not have level playing field, it recreates social unacceptance. I will focus here because I'm a bit too long. So that's, to my view, maybe the two main ones. And the last one is just one word, is de-risking. We still don't have a de-risking facility for the agri-transition. So all the risks are bear by the farmers, which is not possible to bear because of the fact that they are, on average, the weakest link. So we need a broad de-risking facility, either within the CAP or outside the CAP. It's another debate, but we need to have it. More or less on the model of organic, which worked. I know that the organic market share is down now because of the prices, inflation, and so on, but the model worked very well to de-risk for 3 years or 5 years the risk associated to the transition. But when you do exactly the same thing for pesticides, you do not have any de-risking facility. When you do the same thing for animal welfare, you do not have any de-risking facility. So we need to organize this with what I call transition contracts. A transition contract that will say, okay, I am a company buying on the market, selling goods on the market, like Danone, Unilever, Bonduelle, or whoever, Nestle, and so on. Then I have off-take contracts to de-risk the change in my sourcing. And then I'm the cooperative, and I have off-take contracts with the farmers ahead of my sourcing. And then there is a public policy that could be put on top of this to have an additional layer of de-risking. EIB is not doing it. The CAP is not doing it. Member states, the vast majority, I'm not aware of the 27, of course, but the vast majorities of them don't have that kind of facility. To my view, it's a top priority as well to ease the process and to lower the risk and share the risk associated with transition. So that are three very concrete proposals that are, to my view, probably the top 3 ones to depolarize and implement.
Excellent, thank you, and perfectly on time. I understand you have to leave us, but thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today, Pascal. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there, of course, we did a bit of a very broad turnaround over all different kinds of themes there, but we'll dig into all of them a lot deeper now. Perhaps I'll turn to you, Grzegorz, first for the farmer's view, based on what we've just heard from Pascal, talking about the weakest link of the value chain and how to try and change the power structures there in the food chain. You said in your opening remarks, that you need to have a closer connection with farmers, to consumers, to help them understand what the farm is doing. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on Pascal's reflections there, and perhaps also a comment on this need to depolarize this debate and whether and how you see that we can do that.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. We agree all about it. As I mentioned, we have been able to build this whole model for many years. And we have time and a common economy for that because of the scale and the idea behind it. But it's not easy. And now with the new ideas, which are very much relevant, talking about our future and surviving, the farmers really feel themselves as the boys who are to be be bashed because they are the weakest link in the value chain. Agree. I also work as an expert in Copa Cogeca working party pork meat, and there we discuss very much across at least 12 countries with dealing with the pig production. The new requirements which are on the way, including the animal welfare standards. That was a very hot issue over the last 2 years. And the general idea which we have and which we express, that we are very open to talk about it, because we would like to address these things and to change the standards, to adopt it. We just need to be aware of the costs and the time needed for implementation of these changes. So coming back to the comments by Pascal, also how to distribute the cost of this change, implementation of this change across the value chain. And of course, we see examples where now in single member countries trying to implement labeling on animal welfare. That has been existing in at least 7, 8 countries now. And there have been also supermarket chains paying a high margin to the farmers for meat, in this case coming from high animal standards. But this has proved to be quite unstable. So this higher margin seemed to disappear over time, and the farmers felt left with their own costs and their own challenge, not having a clear perspective and frame for this change and the process of change. So very much I would like to support the idea of more fair distribution of costs and all what it takes to introduce the change, whether we talk about animal welfare, pesticides, reduction of carbon footprint. Also because talking about the consumers, and also I think there is a lot of research and reviews on what are the main criteria for the consumers to choose the product on the shelf. And we would all like to say and declare, yes, we would like to buy organic or high animal welfare or low carbon footprint, but in the end the price really has very great significance here, and that is proven in a lot of research, I think. So a combination of building the awareness, so education, and building this awareness by the consumers with good solutions for in good time and good financing tools for the implementation of the change over a wise period of time. That could be the solution. Let me just finish with this conclusion.
Thank you. And so, Brigitte, let me turn to you now. Grzegorz mentioned there a few times the animal welfare legislation. There was this promised overhaul of the animal welfare legislation. I know Pascal spoke about the lack of legacy of the farm to fork, but this is one of the areas there was some success. One out of the 4 promised parts of the proposal that was put forward. Clearly a very strong support from citizens, as we also saw in the first presentation. So I want to turn to you to ask, how can we carry on the momentum of that overhaul and carry that work forward, and also bring in this element that were mentioned both by Grzegorz and Pascal, especially Pascal's concept of de-risking in that transition for the animal welfare legislation. What are your thoughts there? You have to maybe grab the microphone there. Hiding. Yeah.
Thank you. So for animal welfare in particular, I think Grzegorz exactly mentioned the important elements. It's the length of the transition and how to make it viable for all the actors in the chain. So, as you know, the proposal that is on the table is a proposal that covers the transport of animals. In the future, the other elements continue to be worked on, but they are not yet on the table. This is in the hands of our colleagues from DG Sante. I am from DG Agri. And what we do in that context from a DG Agri point of view is to look into the economics of that transition for more animal welfare. One thing is clear, and we saw it also with the first slides that Stuart showed at the start of our session. There is a strong connection, let's say, between citizens and animal welfare. So from a societal point of view, it is something that comes regularly under the spotlight. And from a European policy perspective, absolutely no compromise can be done on animal welfare. Animal welfare is a value that we all share. We do not necessarily all have the same images in mind when we talk about animal welfare, but for sure this is important for citizens and by definition important for Europe. So the question mark is not will we improve animal welfare? The question mark is how do we do it so that it makes sense from a rational point of view. As we discussed earlier on, we need livestock farming in the future. So we need to make livestock farming adhere to animal welfare standards that are the best we can have according to our understanding of animal behavioral needs. So that's really the challenge. How much time and how do we accompany that from an economic point of view so that we don't lose our food security from an animal perspective along the way.
Thank you for that. Pierre-Marie, let me turn to you now. So we've spoken a lot about, the farmers being the weakest link of the value chain, the need to tackle this problem from an agri-food systems perspective. And, a lot of the, from the farm to fork, a lot of the fork side of the proposals were lost, one of which I'm thinking of is the SFS, the Sustainable Food Systems Law. So I'm curious to hear, this law was supposed to be a backbone for sustainability initiatives moving forwards, was supposed to, give this vision of food systems. I'm curious to hear what you see the impact of not bringing this proposal forward was, how to ensure this kind of concept is picked up again in the next mandate, and how that can help take a more holistic view of the agri-food sector.
Yeah, I think we should be clear about what was to be in that proposal. I cannot be exhaustive here, but the idea was to have at least 2 or 3 things. One was to have, in a way, a characterization of the main features of what would be a sustainable food system, which would, in a way, serve as a backbone of a political compromise. What do we collectively believe is a sustainable food system? That was the first aspect of the proposal. The second aspect of the proposal was really to bring in the idea of what consumers kind of do, has to do, or the way in which they, buy and eat things has to do with the food environment they have. And in a sense, by this, it's kind of moving away from this idea of the responsible consumer that would be nudged to change his practices. We've been trying that for the last 4 years. It hasn't worked. So, of course, we should not stop with food labeling, etc., but we should be clear about the fact that we are not going to solve everything with that. And we need to kind of take a broader approach to what frame our food behaviors. That could have been part of the proposal. And so with this idea that spelling out this idea of a food environment as something that frames behaviors, and then bringing in some proposal solutions to change that food environment through labeling, that was part of the proposal, of course, but also public procurements and food labeling and public procurements were the 2 things. But I think the main point here is that the sustainable food system legislative framework that was planned was more a kind of a messaging opportunity, a way to get people discussing about, okay, what do we believe we need as a sustainable food system for us? But we should not expect too much from that. I think the big question is, There are three things that I would like to pick up in what has been said by Brigitte, Pascal, and Grzegorz. One is that Pascal has said a lot about the instruments. What are the instruments that he believes could help us to move forward? But while I don't have a strong stance on the instruments he has mentioned, the key question is, what do we want those instruments, to support? And we still have that open question, and that's why the Sustainable Food System legislative framework could have been useful, have built that compromise around what we want. I think there's another thing I would like to say. In Brigitte's slide, there was this idea in the last slide that we need livestock to recycle leftover, to manage landscapes, etc. That's absolutely true. Yet, I think we should dare to say that if this is the kind of livestock we want, then the level of production would be totally different from what we have today. Because today, the livestock we have is not that one. The dairy sector in France is consuming like 2.5 million of soybean importing each year based on silage maize, etc. It's not managing so much landscape, right? The poultry sector is importing the rest of the soybean and consuming maize that is grown sometimes in very bad pedoclimatical conditions. So yes, of course, livestock has a key role to play in the functioning of our agroecosystems. But if this is what we want the livestock to do, then it's a different type of livestock sector than the one we have today. And then comes the point, which is that we are not going to be able to maximize every dimensions of our food system. We are not going to have like millions of jobs with like very nice incomes, with food very cheap and landscapes very beautiful. That's not going to be possible. So what is the space in which we discuss about those trade-offs and how we deal with them socially, politically? We were saying with Jean-Louis Perrault just before we came here, there might be some losers. Jean-Louis was like, there will be a lot of losers. How do we address that? There will be some winners as well. So it's not about everyone losing everything, but it's about daring to discuss that.
It's a very difficult and sensitive message to get across, that there will be some losers in this and how to decide that equitably. Brigitte, let me bring you in on this point, because Pierre-Marie there, touched on a very sensitive issue of the need to reduce the number of livestock. Now, I actually was just in the Netherlands this week speaking to a livestock farmer himself, who was a very rare breed of livestock farmer, because he was actually completely on board with this idea that we need to reduce the number of livestock. Even rarer category, he was a farmer that was very satisfied with his job, so it was also nice to see. But I'm curious to hear from you how to communicate the message here of this need to reduce livestock numbers, the issues of nitrates. You mentioned nitrate leakage in your opening remarks. How to bring farmers on board in that sustainable transition and shifting to this less is more mentality. I mean, how do we help farmers transition there in their thinking?
I'm sure I've not said that we need to reduce livestock numbers. I'm sure I've not said that, and that's a very important point. What we are looking at, and the research community has a big role to play here, we are looking at how to reduce the negative footprint of livestock. And indeed, as Pierre-Marie just said, there are some types of farming where you can better reduce greenhouse gas emissions, for instance. So the so-called intensive farming, pig farming, you can do a lot to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that you cannot do with grazing animals. You have other types of farming that are very good for biodiversity, for reducing pollution, for having carbon sequestration. So it's not that we have seen that there is a type of farming that must disappear. That's absolutely not the case. And there is also no say about we need to reduce livestock numbers. What we need to know, and that's why I wanted to start with figures, with facts, what we need to have is a factual basis that everybody shares, that we agree on where we are in terms of population, in terms of farmers, and again, I want to put the human being at the center of what needs to be done. So How many farms do we have? Do we have big farms? Do we have small farms? We have both, of course. How to take care of them? So that's the real challenge for policymakers to take account of that diversity. So it's not an econometric model where you plug in, you reduce by 10% livestock population, and then you have solved all your problems. So this is absolutely not the case. So what are we doing? And again, with the research community, trying to look at feed additives that are reducing methane emissions, trying to look into genetics, how can it help, boosting bioenergy, so how to produce energy, because we have also some dependencies in Europe on the energy side, so how can you reduce our dependency from third countries that maybe are not our best friends, how to make circular economy viable, not necessarily on farm, but in a village, in an area, how can we have that also with collectivities, with the village life, etc. So there are many, many things that can be done before thinking about reducing livestock numbers. So on the Commission side, we are not talking about reducing livestock numbers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very clear. Thank you for that. Grzegorz, I will turn to you now on the same point. It can be very difficult. Maybe I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how we can better communicate with farmers about this sustainable transition, what it is, what it's not, trying to break that down, and also maybe we can explore the framing a little bit of this farmers versus the environment, which I think we've increasingly seen with the farming protests that we've seen. Of course, when I speak to farmers, I know they understand that the first ones that are being impacted by this environment, these climate change, these problems that we're seeing. How can we maybe try and make the sustainable transition appealing for farmers, communicate with them more effectively, and also challenge this pitting of maybe farmers against the environment?
Very good questions. But first comments on what Brigitte said. All right, it's not about the how, it's about the how. I think that was the Americans that said. So I agree fully. That's our challenge, our task. And also Pierre-Marie with the questions about are we going to eat less? Are we going to produce less? I don't know if it's possible, but I can just remember my own childhood back in the 80s in Poland, where to buy a piece of meat was a challenging task, and we used to have meat only once a week on Sundays, which was quite okay. The question is if we could go back to that. I don't know. But we know that in average we eat in Europe, I believe, 75 kilos meat per year per capita. And dietitians say 35 could be good. If it's possible to go down, I don't know, but we could live with it, I'm sure. So maybe there is a way both in both directions. So about the how, but also the quantity and the reduction in the diets. So to eat less meat, but coming from more sustainable models. And now back to the farmers and the protests. Indeed, in Poland we are experiencing the peak of protests these days. Yesterday, when I left Warsaw, we had another big protest in our capital city. And there is a big meeting of the Prime Minister Donald Tusk with the farmers on this coming Saturday, which will be decisive for what they decide to do further, the farmers. And what I completely disagree with, and I do not understand, are the messages brought by the farmers, the two main reasons of their protests, which are, number one, European Green Deal. It should be just abandoned, thrown away fully. So they do not understand what it's about. It's not only about agriculture, it's about the whole transition with the energy. And if you go into the farm-to-fork strategy and biodiversity, indeed, it should serve the future of the farmers themselves. And we can discuss and question the way and the time of implementing different things. We have discussed it and we understand in this forum. And the other one is, of course, the problem with the Ukrainian grain, as they call it, flowing into Poland and devastating the markets, which again needs more analysis because, as experts have calculated, the inflow of the Ukrainian flow into Poland maybe has contributed by 1/3 to the fall of prices over two last years. More the factors that have more influenced this phenomena is the general fall of prices on the markets, the global markets, and also Russia dumping grain into the world markets, even the grain stolen from Ukraine. And these things are so complex, they are not easy to understand when you just look at the surface of it. So the reasons which are articulated are not good enough, and they are wrong directly, I would say. But they are there. And they are coming and they are criticizing the European Green Deal and putting the blame on it along with the market situation. How to explain it? It will take time. In the first place, we all know psychology and how our brains work. So we need to admit to some extent that you are right, farmers. You have a problem because the real problem is the lack of profitability. That is the reason. As many people say, if we didn't have this problem with profitability, the problem of European Green Deal or Ukrainian grain wouldn't be existing. And this is a structural challenge we have. If we take Poland together with Romania as the countries in the EU with most fragmented structure of agriculture, let me give you the example of Poland with 1,300,000 farms. Average size 11 hectares. Right or not right? Because in real life we know there are a lot of informal lease contracts, so the farmers collect more land, but still the small ones and the owners keep the title and keep showing they are independent farmers in order to get the subsidy, in order to get some tax, what you call it?
Rebate. A rebate.
Rebate, yes. So this is a big challenge which will take time to adopt to a more real picture. And we need to start working with it. So in the first place, communication and calming the situation, explaining and going into detail about the farm to fork strategy, biodiversity, showing the incentives. Now we have, what do we have now? Eco schemes are implemented differently from country to country across Europe, which basically are good practices. There's nothing new in these eco schemes when we look closer at them, not big challenges, but again the uncertainty about how they work and how much money I will get for these eco schemes. So this is the first year, and farmers are now waiting, okay, how is it going to work? So that, as you can see, there are a number of factors making life for the farmer uncertain, unpredictable to some extent, together with this low profitability because of the low prices. So trying to find a solution, I would look at short-term solutions, calm situation down, talk to the farmers, slowly explain what it is about when we talk about the European Green Deal. And then on the long term, in a dialogue, talk these eco schemes, the incentives, how much money have you got this year, what to change in the common agriculture policy, and already now, when we talk European approach to CAP, really think about the challenges ahead and how to, in my mind, and I hear also for the farmers, to move more money from direct payments into structural development, into investments, into things and solutions which can help us adopt to these to the ambitious goals.
Well, you led me very nicely onto my next question, which was all about the cap. So, Pierre-Marie, let me turn to you now. I mean, so we heard from Grzegorz there that the farmers' protests, you know, it actually is about much more fundamental issues than just the environmental measures. But let's talk about the policy response to the farmers' protests at the EU level, because really it's translated into like we spoke about already, the derogations on environmental measures. The Commission is now also, well, there's considerations of reopening the CAP as well to potentially make the GAIACs, the Good Agricultural Practices, from mandatory to voluntary. Curious to hear your thoughts on the impact of this, of reopening the CAP, concerns that you might have, and in general, your reflections about the policy response that we've seen from these protests.
Yeah, thanks. I'll get to that in a second, but I just wanted to pick also the question of like how we work on the situation with farmers and with value chain actors. I think I would fully agree with the idea that it has to be a step-by-step approach. Things will not change overnight, and you know, bringing science into the process could be a way to, you know, start the journey. This is what we've been doing for the last like 18 months with the pork, the beef, and the poultry sector in France in the framework of pathways. So trying to really identify, okay, what's in it for whom, for the processors, for the farmers. We had few retailers in the conversation, and what are the technical options that we can have that are already there, that we can uptake at a larger scale, etc. How much would it cost? And how much of that cost would be passed on to the consumer, and how much would be, you know, paid by public money or by private investment, if any, or by carbon market, whatever. But I think just to say that we need to accept that given the complexity, given the number of objectives, this has to be a step-by-step process, and this has to involve the actors of the whole of the value chain, and probably we will need to do that sector by sector because all sectors are different. Brigitte said that very clearly. The pig sector is not the poultry sector, which is not the beef or the dairy sector. So there is not one size fits all, and even within the sector, of course, the Danish situation is not the French one, so probably there will be some differences there, but that's why we need some key criteria, key overarching goals that we share all of them. That is one. Two is that what we have seen in the framework of our workshop with economic actors is that market conditions are key. Of course, Grzegorz said farmers are, you know, sharing their concerns. They are not getting enough from what they do. But basically, in all the scenarios we've developed with the different sectors, with dairy sectors as well, what we see is that if we stay under the same market conditions, the rooms of maneuver are very limited. What we can do is basically to increase the level of efficiency. For some that will be able to do so, but most of the small farmers will leave the business. We might accept this, but it's not me to say if it's something we wish or not. It's something we need to discuss collectively. And, you know, the kind of more extensive systems that have also a role to play in the whole picture, they are quite endangered under the current market conditions. So how do we discuss about those market conditions? Is it about increasing the price for farmers? Is it about creating a different common market? I don't know. But if we don't address the question of the market conditions, I don't think there are many options left for us. This brings me to a third point, and then I'll get back to the policy questions. But I think in the slide of Brigitte, there was also one key point, which is a geopolitical dimension. You showed us very clearly that, you know, the EU has done much more than any other blocks in the world, and that in the same time, because this was one of the, you know, at the core of the EU project, we are still exchanging a lot with all those countries, with all those regions, I mean, trade-wise. And that is a huge challenge. And I think it's worth reminding everyone, I mean, you probably know here, but when the Farm to Fork was published, the biggest pushback came not from within the EU, well, even though there was some pushback within the EU, but it came from elsewhere. First from the US, and then from most of the southern countries saying, this is not what we want. And I think maybe that was one of the things that the EC could have done better, which would have been to, you know, better promote and better explain what is there. And, I mean, in the Farm to Fork itself, the international dimension is like a one-pager out of the 30 pages. It's kind of weak, and I think we could have been like a bit more vocal on what we want for the rest of the world, what the Farm to Fork means for the rest of the world. I mean, it doesn't mean that South African countries will have to cut by 20% nitrogen use. Doesn't make sense. I mean, they are not using nitrogen at all for many countries. So I think that was not clear enough, and it basically had a negative impact on our ability to move forward and to create the conditions for the farm to be implemented. So now in terms of the policy rollbacks, if I may, that we are seeing now, of course, to be frank, I'm a bit worried, but there I'm speaking more as a, as a think tank than a pure scientist. I'm a bit worried because I think most of those good environmental conditions have their raison d'être. And maybe if I can say a few words here, the biggest raison d'être is that basically agriculture and food is all about how we manage the biomass. It's all about that. So our livestock should be based on how much biomass we can produce and how will that biomass be produced. And most of the GAEC that are now, proposed to be kind of removed are about how to better manage our landscapes to make sure on the long run we'll be able to produce biomass on diversified landscapes, etc. So it's not so much about, oh, we are going to lose fabulous landscapes, etc., which as a personally I might be affected by that, but it's also about, okay, but what if in the long run we are not able to produce anymore because we have destroyed our landscapes? And for me, that's the biggest question. And then in turn, tell something about, okay, how much livestock are we going to be able to rear without importing all the feed?
Yeah, and you raised an interesting point there about the geopolitical dimension of the farm to fork, and of course with the farmers, it's I feel like the core issues when I speak to the farmers at the protest, there's the inequitable pricing structures, but there's also trade as the key problem here. And Brigitte, let me turn to you on this point, because increasingly, the core of these issues are kind of outside the competence of whichever DG are dealing with it. So there's DG Santé has been responsible for much of the farm to fork, DG Agri part of it, but of course these trade dimensions are the competence of neither, and it's a very sticky and difficult situation to be in and to navigate between these, these different areas. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts perhaps on how best to tackle this from your perspective, from DG Agri, from working with the different DGs. It's a very Brussels-focused question, but the current structure of the Commission's, I'm wondering, the current structures, are they cut out for the job? There's discussions now of a European Vice President for Food that perhaps could make an umbrella, bring the policies together. I'm curious to hear your thoughts from, the past few years of dealing with the different areas here and how you can align these.
It would be a better question for our president, of course, so I can only share my personal experience for working in one of the DGs that you have mentioned. I think that the European Commission is at its best for delivering, for communicating, when all various DGs that have a say on a matter work together. And we have possibilities to work together. So to go out of silos, as you may have heard of. And we do that most of the time via task forces that are having people from the various DGs working together. Probably the best frame to work together and to be conscious that we are talking about elements that are affecting citizens' life is to work in an open structure. So from my point of view, I'm not sure that we need an executive vice president for food that would have a number of DGs under his competence. We may have in the future, we may not have. I think that what you need is to have structures, whatever they are, that are conscious that working together is the thing to do. When you have not only people, colleagues working together, but also structures that are sufficiently flexible, that are open to discuss together, then you do not necessarily need to have an organigram that exactly puts in place hierarchical structures to make sure that there is a holistic approach. I think that we've done our best to have that holistic approach. Don't forget that when it comes to the final rules, regulations, directives that are adopted, don't forget that it's not only the Commission working, it's also the Parliament and the Council. So you may have a Commission proposal that, by the way, is always the consensus of all DGs, because it goes through this well-known inter-service consultation. So once you have a Commission proposal that is, by the way, accompanied by thorough impact assessment and all documentation, you have, in principle, a document that has looked at all aspects. But then the reality is that it is tabled to the Parliament and the Council, and there the political views on the Commission proposal are exchanged, and the final text may be rather far away from what the Commission had proposed. But I would say that one of the fascinating assets of the European Commission is that it works on a collegial basis. So whether you have an executive vice president or not for food, with the College of Commissioners, with the inter-service consultation, you have the guarantee that it's not one DG or one particular person that has got a brilliant idea and put it on the table. So this collective thinking, which is hard, so it's really hard to live that on a day-to-day basis, because you have to listen to the views of others who have another mission than yourself. The mission of DG Agri is different from the mission from DG Trade or from the mission of DG Sante. But the system obliges us to sit together and to look at all the various points of view. So I would say that already now we have in place the system that allows us to have a food view without needing necessarily the hierarchy, the organigram to mirror that.
Okay, thank you for your views on that. It's quite a hot topic at the moment. So I would now like to open the floor to questions. I understand there's a few questions, maybe some from online, but I'll go to the room, those of you here in the room first. I had a hand up here. So if you could just introduce yourself, say who your question is to, and also keep your question nice and concise, if possible. Oh, and turn on your mic. Yeah, he's...
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for very good presentations, and I'm glad to hear that we don't need to reduce livestock production. But first of all, I would like to say that farmers and consumers are practitioners. If something is not working, they will not do that. If farmers will have tools to improve animal welfare standards and will have resources, then they will do it. If this proposition of higher animal welfare standard will just increase costs, not bring back benefits and profit, they will not do it because they have to pay the bills. The same consumers. If consumers see that have animal products on different animal welfare standards, and for higher animal welfare standards, they have just etiquette, nothing else in product, they will not buy again these products. They will not pay more for just sign on etiquette that this is high animal welfare standard. The added value produced on farm will taken to the plate of consumers, then consumers will pay for it. Of course, farmers and consumers and everybody which is care of animals and environment will say they are very interested to have higher animal welfare standard in every places because they care for animals. The same farmers and consumers. But if they have to choose to have higher animal welfare standard or put food on plate for their families, they will choose the food for the families. And one short question.
Okay, the question, yeah.
The question is, do we have definition of size of farm? Because we are saying on European Commission level of different size of farm, but we don't have the definition. Which farm is small, which farm is middle, and which farm is very big?
Yeah.
Because we have different meaning of that. Like we have very small farm in Poland is 1 to 3 hectares, and big farm is 150 hectares.
Okay.
But on Ukraine we have small farm 500 hectares and big farm 11,000 hectares.
Okay.
And what's the size?
So the definition of a farm, or the size of the farm. I'm wondering, anybody like to come in on that point, the sticky issue of definitions of farms and how we approach that at the policy level? Don't all jump at once. Pierre-Marie, you?
No, very, very quickly on the question of the farms. I think I would not answer to the question, is there a definition of what is big, large and small, because you already said, Adam, that the situation is really different from one country to another one. And just to give you a few figures, when you look at the fixed assets of carnivorous farms across the EU, you range from 1 million euro on average for France, or 800,000 to 1 million, to over 3.5 million euros in Denmark, and the same amount, so to speak, in Netherlands for the average farm, which means that they are much bigger farm, while in Poland it's below 500k of fixed assets. So the average farm is really different from one country to another one. We need to live with that. That's the real life in which we are when we are 27 in the European Union. So now how do we adapt the policies? I think I would not want to speak on behalf of Brigitte, but the spirit behind the new delivery model is precisely to leave more space for member states to deal with those differences. So,
Brigitte, would you like to come in on this point?
I wanted to make exactly the same point, and maybe the question is, what for do we need to define a small farm, a medium farm, or a big farm? I think that your question was a different one. I think you were pointing at the potential enlargement of the Union to Ukraine, and the fact that having Ukraine as an additional member state, maybe in 10 years, 20 years, I don't know how many years, you will have a very different agriculture compared to the 27 member states' agriculture. So the dimension is much different. That's the last example that you gave. And indeed, depending on whether, for instance, you design a support scheme for small farms, of course, if you design that, you need to establish what is a small farm for that particular support scheme.
Yeah, definitions are always a tricky issue. I mean, even the definition of what is an active farm and what is not, I remember in the CAP reform was a big issue. But I mean, now with the simplification plan from the Commission, there was specifically, plans for an exemption of small farmers from on-farm checks, for example. So actually, it sounds like a technical point, but the definition is a really core element here. So I just would like to bring you here on this as well, Grzegorz. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. The question about the active farmer would be more important, I think. The size can be very subjective. Even taking our example in Goodvalley, I mentioned we have 13,000 hectares of land and 25 pig farms, but they are spread around in a big area of Pomerania. The largest distance would be 250 kilometers between the farms. So they operate as single units somehow. So these would be farms to us in our operation. But active farmer, so the farmer who contributes to the market with the produce, instead of just keeping his theoretical status as farmer in order to either get subsidies or the other benefits which I mentioned before. And that is a challenge because in different member states, I believe we have different definitions. In Poland, it's very general. So an active farmer is a factor who received any subsidy from the EU last year. So that would be the task.
Yeah, it was always incredible to me that we couldn't agree on the definition of an active farmer. Remember that very clearly. I see a hand here. Yes, if you could introduce yourself, say who your question is directed to, and try to keep it nice and concise. Thank you.
Yes, hello. My name is Marie Cloteau, and I'm working for the French region's Grand Est. And Pierre-Marie, you referred to the proposal on the Commission's proposal, which was at the moment discussed on sustainable food system, which could have a great impact, especially for public authorities, because it was supposed to discuss about public procurement. And as you know, it has a great impact on food system. So I was wondering, because that proposal is not anymore on the table or is not planned anymore, so I was wondering where we are with that proposal. Can we expect it soon or not? Because the public authorities are really expecting it. Thank you.
Is your question to Brigitte? To Brigitte.
Thank you. So indeed, that proposal does not exist for the moment, but we are working on it. The works continue for a number of initiatives announced under the Farm to Fork strategy or the Green Deal in general. As announced by Commission President von der Leyen, we are making a pause, and this does not mean making a U-turn or forgetting or whatever, making a pause to have the time to dialogue. So it's the moment we are in now. You would like to know, is it for soon? Is it for far away in the future? It is certainly not for this month and not for next month. Probably if you put your time horizon at the end of the year or beginning of next year, this makes more sense. So there are more chances that those proposals are tabled after the European elections, after the new parliament is in place, after the new commission is in place. But this time for dialogue is a very important one, and we should not rush into finalizing whatever the current Commission might want to finalize. I think it's a very courageous move from the Commission side to have said, okay, the Commission could have decided, okay, we are coming to the end of our mandate, let's rush into all our initiatives. No. This very courageous move was, okay, let's take the time to talk, to review everything that we've done, because a lot has been done. So it's like building a house. So let's look at the foundations. Let's look into making them work. Let's make sure that they are leak-proof, etc., that everything is in place, that electricity can flow from one part of the house to the other. And take the time to think how you continue to put the roof, how you have the furniture in the various rooms. So this time is a very precious moment, and listening to the various stakeholders, including society as a whole, is the time we are in now, and that's for sure to the benefit of the future sustainable food system framework that will come later on.
Thank you for that. I like the house analogy. Perhaps we're closer to building the foundations than decorating. But okay, thank you. I would take a question from up here. Yes.
Hi, so I'm Xavier Bourgeois, and I am farmer in Belgium. I will repeat some opinion, but yes, farmers are not against the Green Deal and well-being for animals. And I am really happy on such conference you organize some pitch of new good practice and to show good example. For me, it's really good than when you could show here in Brussels some good example like this. Mm-hmm. But I will speak also a little bit about the well-being of the farmer and the welfare of the farmer, because what do you think about the chicken meat market or the chicken eggs? That now everybody now or should now here will import more than in the past and more than before the last rules. And to take a good example of bad welfare, I will say, last week we were here on the street under the heavy rain in Brussels, and what we read on the smartphone, then European Commission signed new agreement with Chile and Kenya to import more products with no rules. And what do you think about that?
Okay, so again, on the trade question, I don't necessarily want to go to Brigitte again, right? But does anybody else want to jump on this point? Grzegorz, Pierre-Marie.
Yeah, I can say a few words here. No answer. Only things probably you already know. But I mean, when DigiTrade makes a trade deal, they have like multiple sectors to take into. I'm not legitimizing. I totally agree with you. Just to say that there are reasons for DigiTrade to make such a deal. I think from a farmer perspective and from a food system perspective, there are a number of reasons why we should not have done that deal. But apparently it's not enough because there are other interests at play. And again, I think it goes beyond the food system. It's a political question.
Brigitte, I'll turn to you on this point on the trade element, how to bring the farming voice into that more.
Thank you. So this is a very legitimate question and complaint, I could say. What we are doing now, and I'm sure you are aware of it, is that in each upcoming free trade agreement, we are negotiating a sustainability chapter. So it will not come from one day to the other, but it's part of this communication reach out that has been addressed before. So those says that the Commission has not done enough to bring the rest of the planet on the same path. So that's the ambition. It's a very high ambition, but the idea is that we show the good example, and we try to convince those farmers show the good example, and we try to convince trade partners around the globe to go on the same pathway. Let's come back to the theme of today's conference. So more and more in the upcoming free trade agreements, you will have the chapter on sustainability to make sure that third country partners also make the same commitments. You have in some agreements a definition of the concession that is given on livestock products in particular that says that it must come from, let's take chicken because you were talking about that. So it must come from batteries that are no longer the old batteries, but coming from the same animal welfare conditions as in the EU. We have that with Ukraine, for instance. Of course, now the war has put that all on hold, but from 2026, in principle, anything that comes from Ukraine should follow the same animal welfare conditions as those that we have in the Union. And MEP Canfin was talking about mirror clauses. So we have two ways of trying to have the world coming on the same path as ours. We have mirror clauses. Those are very, very hard to put in place. But we have also free trade agreements. So we know, of course, how farmers feel about free trade agreements. But they are a way, first of all, to have allies in geopolitical terms. And they are also a way to make the Green Deal a worldwide example, and it's a long path, so it does not apply to free trade agreements that were concluded in the past, of course.
Okay, hope that answers your question. We had a question over here. I'll come here and then I'll come there. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for really interesting presentations. My name is Brigitte Steenberg and I'm the Secretary General of the European Poultry Meat Association. So I want to thank our Belgian friend over there. Thanks a lot. That's a really good question and we work with that all day long. Anyway, what I'm going to ask you is a total different field. It's about the lack of knowledge on how we produce our food. Because it was a very interesting presentation that came up very first with the results of the Eurobarometer on animal welfare. One of the key figures that weren't there was that only 6% of the people that were asked in the surveys had any contact with farm animals. 6%. So people do simply not know what is going on at the farms. People do not know how their food is produced. I saw a YouTube video with a young man, he was demonstrating for climate change, and he said we should ban all farming. That's what creates the climate change. Nobody asked him how he was going to get anything to eat. So what I am asking you now, and it's for the whole panel, how are we going to inform our fellow citizens on how our food is produced? How can we reconnect people to how their food is produced? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Gregor, perhaps I come to you first. You've been quieter for a while. Thoughts about reconnecting citizens with their food?
Very good question. And believe me, we encounter it very often, even out in the rural area we operate. People have got detached from agriculture. And when we talk especially the younger generations, the children, they really they do not have interest, do not have access to this knowledge. So I think the task should be defined on at least several levels, but both educational programs at schools. That's what it should start, but not only theory, but practical visits to the farms, which are practiced somewhere, but not enough. But that works very, very well. And even when we discussed going back to the size of farm with our and the local neighbors, where we wanted to reestablish or maybe build a new farm for, let's say, 10,000 pigs, that would create a reaction. What kind of industrial farm are you going to build here? Well, have a look at these existing ones. Please visit this farm, see the animals, ask people living around it. And then attitude changed very often. The same would apply for children and young generation, or whoever needs this knowledge, I strongly believe. So this is the educational level of the schools, and then the overall educational and communication systems which are necessary on all possible levels. That's the only way to cope with it, I would imagine.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of the clock ticking, so unless anyone's on the edge of their seat, no, we're okay. I had a question up here. Yes, I'll take a few more questions. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Justin Zara from Environmental Defense Fund Europe. We're a climate NGO that helps farmers to do climate-smart agriculture. And my question is for Brigitte and Pierre-Marie, because, Gregor, I could not agree more with all of the points you made that it is about income support, really, that is driving the problems. But my question is, we do know what the solution sets are basically for farming, and Brigitte, you mentioned them, feed additives, enteric fermentation, manure management. But I zoom in on the slide that you had that showed how the EU has done more than anyone else in the past 3 decades. And I guess my question is, when I look at that and I zoom in on methane, which is one of the very big problems from agriculture, but also one of the opportunities, we know that what really drove that down was actually the milk quota regime, which decreased the cow herd, but also brought in a system of common management, which really had our milk farmers, I think, working in a quite stable condition, save maybe for 2008 and 2009. But my question is, can we actually really solve these problems and get to a place where there is broad sustainability and good livelihoods without bringing back the big C in the CAP, the common element? Because when I look at the CAP strategic plans, for instance, I see that in the terms of methane, the result indicator 13, which tackles greenhouse gas emissions and bringing those down from livestock, it's less than half of the member states which has planned those. Okay. So if I'm a dairy farmer in one of the others and I would like to try out these solutions, I don't even have support for that. Okay. So, I would really like your views on this.
Question on the common element of the CAP and maybe the move to renationalisation. Who's jumping first? Brigitte, let's come to you first and then maybe bring you in here.
Yes, the C in the CAP is the most important and it is of paramount importance for the European Commission. How do we make sure that we still have a common policy for farming? The first thing is that those CAP strategic plans have to be approved by the Commission. So each member state comes to Brussels, to call it like that, with its CAP plans and has to discuss about the content of the CAP plan. So there is, at that stage, a look for commonalities and for making sure that collectively what member states have designed and that takes account of their situation on the spot will meet the objectives. So adoption by the Commission, setting objectives. So the objectives are common at EU level, and the role of the Commission is to make sure that what each member state is preparing will collectively again meet the overall objective. And then you have those indicators that you were rightly pointing at that allow to trace progress year after year or every second year, and the possibility for member states to amend their CAP plans if they have to redirect the eco schemes that they have put in place, the agri-environmental measures that they have under the so-called second pillar, or any aspect of their CAP plan. So the commonality is in objectives, in the process, and in the follow-up, in the monitoring of what member states are doing.
Thank you very much, Pierre-Marie. Striking the balance between the common element and the flexibility we've seen in this CAP reform.
Yeah, no, very tricky question and central, crucial question. I think it brings us to two questions. One is that of, what are rules that apply in the different member states, and what are the opportunities or measures that farmers can benefit from for the transition, which is more or less what Brigitte is answering on. But the other aspect is also the fact that we are on a common market, and the fact that, back to what I said at the very beginning, the CAP is an instrument, but what is the vision that instrument, looks to serve or is to implement? And I think here, when we were discussing with French dairy farmers, for example, they were telling us, okay, your analysis of the possibility to transition towards, more grass-fed systems, etc., is really nice, with producing more cheese, less powdered milk, etc. Well, our industrial system is not, for the moment, fit for purpose, but let's think about that. But then, our biggest problem would be that the Dutch and the Danes would continue to produce milk at a much lower price than us, because they are gearing towards a totally different approach, which is much more like, feed conversion efficiency focused, with like huge tables, etc. And what do we do with the internal market? We thought it was a captive market, and it's not anymore a captive market. We are more and more products coming from the external, from the common market coming in France. So I think the common is also about, okay, do we accept that the different countries are gearing towards different kind of livestock sectors? And what are the consequences of that? And I don't have an answer, but I think now we are not necessarily addressing the right question around that, and we should go a step further.
Thank you for that. I'm aware the clock is ticking. I don't want to keep anyone from coffee and tea, and obviously refreshments are the most important part of an agri-food event. But do we have maybe one more question? There were hands. I did see some hands. There's a hand here. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Last question. Thank you.
Yes. Hello. Thanks for taking this last question. I will try to make it quick. My name is Ocean. I'm a researcher at UC Louvain here in Belgium. This is two questions addressed to Brigitte. You talked first about food security from an animal perspective, which I found interesting, because taking pork as an example, we're the second world's biggest producer of pork and the biggest exporter in the world. So we are actually largely self-sufficient in most animal products, including pork. I was just wondering, what do you mean with food security from the livestock or animal perspective? And secondly, you talked about the livestock numbers and saying reducing livestock numbers is a no-go. So I was just reflecting on what you said about water and air and soil pollution, taking the nitrates directive. You said efficiency could be the solution. However, we're seeing it's not working. For example, taking the Netherlands, I think they have very good technologies, and yet they're way above the threshold. So, what would be your perspective on the efficiency improvements, because it's not working, it's not enough? Thanks.
Excellent last questions. Very good. So it allows me to clarify maybe what could be misunderstood. So food security, I have not put that word, by the way, but okay, let's talk about food security from an animal product point of view. What I've said is that currently the EU diet is served at 50% by animal products. So our protein intake depends on animal products. And I could add that there are some micronutrients that are only sourced with animal products and some that are not, where you do not have alternatives that would allow humans to get those micronutrients. Yes, we are more than self-sufficient in most of the animal production sectors in the EU. If you have a talk at the FAO, for instance, then you realize that there is a part of the world that does not want Europe to reduce production because there are some countries that would find themselves in food security hardship if Europe was no longer producing. So let's not forget about the world dimension of what we are doing in Europe. And then reducing livestock number is a no-go. I've not said that. What I've said is that I have not said that we have a policy to reduce livestock. I've not said that reducing livestock is a no-go. What I mean is that on the spot, farmers are the best place to see what makes sense in their environment. And farmers in the Netherlands are very conscious of what is possible in their area of production. So the solutions must be refined based on conditions that are very different, not only from one member state to the other, but from one area to the other. So the solutions are not putting in an econometric model livestock reduction by 10%. That's my message. It's not my message that nobody has to reduce livestock. We need to know, to see what's the basis on which we are working, and those who know their business will know how to make sure that they become sustainable in the future. And it might be that in some areas where you have particular hotspots with an impact on pollution, air, water, soil pollution, it might be that the solution will be that it's not in that area that livestock farming would continue. But there is no policy from the Commission to say livestock numbers must reduce.
Okay, so you're not against reduction. Excellent, thank you. That was a great question to finish on. Thank you very much. I'll have to bring this panel to a close now. Thank you to all of our panellists. Thank you to you in the audience as well. I'd like to invite you all now for a tea and a coffee.